in November I reviewed a 1970s Leica CL. You may remember I wasn't a huge fan. The one thing that did look promising with the system was the tiny 40mm f2 Summicron-C that would have originally shipped with the CL. I didn't have one to test at the time, but promised to hunt one out for a future review. Well, here we are. I finally managed to snag this early 1973 version in superb condition, mounted to this mid-80s Canadian-made Leica M4P. More will follow on that M4P in a future review, but as a quick heads up, I will tell you, wow, it's a goodie. Much more so than I dreamed it would be. The 40mm Summicron-C and the Leica M4P are actually a very appropriate pairing, in that they are both very much the underdogs of the Leica lineup. The 40mm Summicron-C is the cheapest native M-mount Leica lens, and the M4P is the cheapest Leica to sport the famous M moniker. In the 1970s, 40mm was becoming a very popular focal length. Many consumer-grade cameras, such as the Canon Canonet, Olympus Trip and Rollo 35, sported a fixed 40mm lens. It was seen as a convenient one-size-fits-all option that was wide enough for most applications, but still long enough to use for portraiture. As discussed in my videos, Leica was treading water in the 1970s, losing market share to these cheaper Japanese manufacturers. The CL was Leica's crack at competing with them, and if it was to work, then it was going to need a 40mm lens. In truth, I'm not a big user of wide-angle lenses. I've had a number of different 35s over the years, and find them just a little too wide for my needs. I have, however, owned a number of cameras with 40mm lenses, including the excellent Voigtlander Nocton f1.4, and find them to be much more up my alley, as they're very useful for portraiture that shows a little more background context. The 40mm Summicron-C shares a very close design to Leica's 35mm Summicron-M, with the same number of elements and optical design, yet somehow manages to pack it all into an even smaller, lighter and more compact package, and at less than half the price. As you can see from these side-by-side images, the 40mm is really quite a bit shorter, making it the perfect everyday photojournalistic carry, but where optical performance is still of utmost importance. I thought it'd be interesting to compare the 40 and 35 at various apertures to see if there was any point in owning the more expensive 35mm. So I headed down the pub, grabbed a pint and took these images. For complete transparency, this is a 1972 pre-ASPH 35mm Canadian-made Summicron-M from the exact era as the Summicron-C. You will find the modern designs of the later ASPH crons to be a lot sharper and more clinical. Please feel free to pause the video should you wish to inspect any of the images in greater detail. To my eyes, they're almost indistinguishable. Obviously you can observe the slightly wider field of view on the 35mm, but it's not as big a difference as you might first think. The bokeh is much about the same at faster apertures, the contrast, resolution and sharpness also appearing to be almost identical. Very decent with both to my eyes. There is just enough of the vintage charm you'd expect from lenses of this era, while still having the nice Modernist resolution you'd hope for from Leica. So why on earth would you buy the bigger, heavier and more expensive Summicron-M 35mm? The biggie for most users will be the lack of 40mm frame lines in any Leica M film camera. But then, in all honesty, I'm not entirely sure that the 35mm frame lines of my Leica M4P, or indeed of any Leica M, give a truly accurate display of the image area. There will always be a certain amount of give and take. For that reason, I feel more than confident using the 35mm lines on my M4P. One other consideration is filter thread sizes. Whilst I hate using filters on decent glass, as a film shooter that likes to use fast apertures, I do regularly use a 3-stop ND filter when things get a little bright. I have an E39 Leica ND filter that conveniently fits most of my Leica lenses, and guess what? It fits the 35mm Summicron-N too. Sadly, the 40mm Summicron-C has some super weird filter thread size, that although very close to the E39 isn't quite close enough. Luckily, some genius chap in the States manufactures and sells an inexpensive adapter that converts the Summicron-C's thread to E39. I'll put a link here if you need one, as the bloke's a damn hero. The Summicron-C also comes with one of those retracting rubber hoods, which you don't tend to see on many Leica lenses. I've got to say I like them, as they're convenient and light and fit the carry-anywhere nature of the lens, but be careful, as they're known to perish over time. My advice is to give them an occasional wipe with some silicone grease, as replacements seem to cost almost as much as the lens itself. I have no hesitation in recommending this little hidden gem of a lens. In fact, I would say that if you only need or can afford one Leica lens, then this would be the one to go for. The image quality, super compact size and relatively cheap price make it an absolute no-brainer.